And you also find out, one of the things I feel very privileged in is that the people you work with along the way who've stood by your side when it's the toughest, you never forget. And they're so special. I think as soon as you discover what you're good at, it's very addictive because the more you invest in what you're good at, the better you feel about it. And so they would take me and I would run these parties in this DJ booth with a friend, and we would get paid the princely sum of £10 for the evening.
Welcome to A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up, the podcast. I'm Sam Cooper Gray, and this is my passion project to interview interesting people about their lives and what they've learned. Today we have the trailblazer that is Edwina Dunn with us. She is well known in the data industry and in the women's equality world. She co-founded Dunnhumby, which pioneers the Tesco Clubcard. She is the founder and chair of the Female Lead, which is an amazing educational foundation that celebrates girls' and women's achievements and uses data to address workplace challenges. In 2019, Edwina was awarded an OBE for her contribution to data and business, and her book, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, When She's in the Room, was published in February 2024. Edwina, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
I'm delighted. Thanks, Sam.
So I'm going to kick off with a really big question, which is, tell me a bit about your journey into adulthood.
So I suppose life began when my parents got married and decided to go and spend 7 years in Brazil. My father was an engineer. He built power stations, and they found themselves as a young couple in Rio de Janeiro, way back at the time when, the country was just really opening up and getting all its infrastructure sorted. So it was an amazing 7 years, and I don't remember a lot of it, but I hang on to the glamour of having started life in Brazil. It's my international element that I love to celebrate.
I love it, absolutely, and it must have been a fascinating place for them to be as well at that time. So you kind of early years in Brazil, formative growing up in the UK?
Yes, we came back to England. We spent some time in Cranley in Surrey, which at the time was a tiny little village. So I had rather an idyllic upbringing where you just ran out to play every day and you were dragged in by your parents when it was sort of going dark. And it was just, exploration and imagination games all the way through childhood. So very enjoyable. Then the railway shut there and we had to move closer in because my father's job had moved to London. And so, we moved to Weybridge. And that's when I sort of started grammar school. Thank goodness there were grammar schools because it meant my education was paid for, which I was very, we did 11 plus, and at the time you got a free place. So I had good school time. I don't think I made the best of it, but I have some good school friends still, so there was something very worthwhile in it. And that was my beginning.
And what was your first foray into kind of working or kind of setting up businesses?
Well, the thing is, living where we lived, there was really nothing to do. So you were really desperate to make some money and to be able to go out in an evening. And so we kind of found lots of things to do. And I always had a Saturday job. I worked in supermarkets right from the beginning. I worked in Budgeons and Cullen's, which was, I enjoyed it actually. And then my sister and I discovered a babysitting business. Well, we didn't discover it. We discovered there was a big demand in the area because people had very good social lives. So we ended up putting together, a sort of seamless. If you ring us, we'll always look after you. And we used to rope my poor brother in when we were both busy and say, you've got to babysit because we can't let our clients down. And yeah, we had great fun. We had no social life whatsoever, but we did do a lot of babysitting. And then gradually, I got an even better offer, which was one of the people that we babysat for used to have like a traveling DJ booth. And they would do these parties in St George's Hill, which was the posh area. I didn't live there, but it was the posh area of Weybridge. And so they would take me and I would run these parties in this DJ booth with a friend. And we would get paid the princely sum of £10 for the evening, which was riches indeed, to go to a party and have the best fun ever. So I loved it.
Oh, now that's a business idea. I like that. That's brilliant. So clearly, entrepreneurship was part of your life from an early age. So tell me a little bit about kind of as you kind of growing up, that journey to starting Dunnhumby.
Well, of course, it wasn't called entrepreneurship back then. It was just how do you make some money when you've got none? And you kind of jump on anything that was in good demand. So when I started work, I really had no idea how much I would love it. And I really found that I had joined this incredible business that actually taught entrepreneurship right from the beginning. It was an American software consultancy. There were about 2,500 people. It was very male, really male, because it was very much government contracting in the US particularly. But I joined this really smart, small team. And there was a lady there called Mel who sort of took me under her wing and taught me, I suppose, how to work hard and have a lot of fun. And it was just the most brilliant time. It was the beginning of technology scaling. We had our own massive computer. I mean, it was the size of a village hall. It's not probably the best analogy, but it was very big. We shut High Holborn on a Sunday, you can imagine, to winch it in to
Wow.
the offices. So it was major. And so I was very much involved in that sort of technology era where big data was a new thing, probably just outside of astronomy and the Meteorological Society. And then it was little old us. And that was really exciting. And so I learned, I think from about the age of 24, what it meant to own your own profit and loss account, which I would still say to this day is the best thing I ever learned, which is, how you manage your costs and your revenue, and that profit is just this tiny little number between, except in the case of a bank, maybe, but, it's a tiny little number for most businesses that you have to manage. And I guess that's really where it all came together. And I started to enjoy myself hugely.
So you clearly had a real thing for data and effectively running your own business with your own P&L.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you took that knowledge of data and tell me a little bit about that journey with the Tesco Clubcard and Dunnhumby and how you got to that.
So learnt a lot at this first company. Met Clive Humby there, who I later married. He was he was a programmer and mathematician. So he was my polar opposite. And fortunately, we made each other look good at work. And it was a good partnership. And we stayed there for quite a long time and actually wanted and hoped to stay there, but they didn't want to invest. We were a profitable business. We were making lots of profits for the group, and we were asking to invest some of those profits. And at the time, they didn't want to do that, which was really a shame. So we actually ended up leaving, and it was all a bit sudden, not what we intended, a little bit more brutal than we'd hoped. And we ended up kind of out on our ear, broke, with an idea, and not much else. So it was not a sweet beginning, but I think with hindsight, it was the best thing. It was the best decision we took, and the most important thing we did. So that's when we started Dunnhumby, and we probably were working on our sort of capability, our infrastructure, our database, as they were very much called back then. And we worked on that for about 5 years before Tesco walked in the door. And it was our big break. And we had no idea at the time, but it was super, super exciting because they had a problem that they couldn't solve, which was they had begun to put together the concept of a loyalty program, and they'd collected test data from about 9 different stores, and it was so big. And I don't think anybody today realised that, that transaction data from the till is so big that at the time there was no technology that could hold it, and we'd built that
Wow.
technology. So we'd effectively created the only platform that could analyse that amount of data and make sense of it. So that was our big break, and super exciting. And we took the data, we analysed it, we fed back to the young New Zealand guy who'd asked us to take a look. And he just kept asking us questions, saying, so what does that mean? What do we do now? What's the next thing? And he suddenly realised he had more questions, and that if he had questions, his board directors, who he knew, would have many more. And so he said, look, I can't present this on your behalf. You're going to have to come in and present it. Which was like, yay, that was like really exciting to go into the board of Tesco and actually present the results to them. And of course, that was the moment where, Ian McLaurin was CEO. He was just plain Ian McLaurin back then. He's Lord McLaurin now. I wonder how that happened. But anyway, he listened to what we presented and was so thoughtful, so quiet, and paused for quite a long time, and then said, what really amazes me is that in just 3 months, you know more about my customers than I know after 30 years.
Wow.
And that statement speaks volumes of his modesty, his intellect, and his courage in recognizing what he didn't know. And it was just the beginning, because then he said, okay, how quickly can we roll this out everywhere? Because we'd proven that it would make them money, and it wouldn't just cost them £150 million, which is what it cost them at the beginning.
Just amazing, isn't it? That the ability to digest that data, which now it would be considered not a huge amount of data,
Yeah.
just didn't exist when you started it. That's just, it blows my mind a little bit. And then you built out Dunnhumby, and then the female lead. So I know the female lead is such a passion of yours. So what was it that drove you then, this huge success within the data and business world, to then really focus on what the female lead now has become?
Well, to be honest with you, Sam, I had quite modest ambitions. When we sold Dunnhumby to Tesco, and exited the business after doing, and achieving all that we'd said and hoped we would achieve, taking the business round the world, and actually creating $1 billion business, so from scratch, which, I think tends to get forgotten, that the UK,
Just that little minor thing of
thing.
creating $1 billion business.
But it was a UK business, and,
Yeah.
it really was a very original concept. But after that, I thought, well, it's been such a good era. I've had such a great career. I want to help girls in the future, and when I was growing up, I didn't see any women. And all the way through my work with retailers, there were no women in the
Mm.
boardrooms everywhere I went. And so I thought, if we can show girls, if they can see women who are alive today, not old and dead like Florence Nightingale and Marie Curie, who are wonderful, but they are old and dead. If we can show them real women rocking it today, and we can start to talk about women with massive success, not just Dyson and Branson, but to talk about women too, then hopefully we can ignite a spark and let them believe in the fact, because they can see it, they can
Mm.
believe it. And so that was the idea. And so we created these films and these books, amazing women, amazing stories. And we've distributed 25,000 of these
Wow.
to schools and universities around the world. And I thought, job done. Because I like completing a project. And I thought, well, I've done it now. That's it. Everyone's got it. And so now they can be it. And that's when Women at Work said, and it really touched me. They said, but we're not seen or heard. And I suddenly realized that the challenge was much, much greater. All these women at work feeling undervalued, underestimated, not seen. And that's when I thought, oh, okay, it's a bigger job. And that's when I thought, I'm going to have to go back to my skills and my roots and use data and evidence to try and change the trajectory for women. And so, yeah, we've taken it forward a lot, invested a lot, and we now have nearly 9 million followers who all participate, follow, and I think trust the
Mm.
female lead. So we've come a long way. There's still an awful lot to do.
I'm loving that one of the things I'm taking from you is that desire to kind of focus on something, get it done, find the next thing, focus on someone, set up a business, make it $1 billion, sell it, set up the female lead, get out 25,000 books. Right, what do I do next? That's a real theme, and one I hear a lot when I talk to entrepreneurs. Just want to go and get something done, which I think probably separates really successful people from moderately successful people, is that real drive, which you've clearly got. So if I go back to your 18-year-old self, the little side hustle babysitting business and the DJing business, what would she recognise in you? So if she could see you now, what would she recognise?
Honestly, I didn't think I was career orientated back then. I didn't feel that I was on my way to doing something amazing or important. I have always been motivated by having fun. And what I discovered, which completely surprised me because I didn't love school, but what I discovered was I really loved work. And I, at the same time, I discovered I wasn't very good at sport. And so I think as soon as you discover what you're good at, it's very addictive, because the more you invest in what you're good at, the better you feel about yourself. And so for me, it was like lights switching on and suddenly realizing, my God, I can have fun doing this. And also feel that you are making an impact, which was the other thing that I discovered is very addictive. If you actually do something and achieve it, you want to do something else and achieve that too. So you keep kind of moving the bar and thinking, oh,
Mm.
yeah, I want to do that next. If I was sportier and fitter, I'd be climbing mountains, but I'm not. So I don't.
Yeah, that does not surprise me that you would find the biggest thing that you could find and go, I'm going up there.
Yes. Yes. And for me, it was a metaphor. It wasn't a real mountain, but at the time, looking at what you're trying to achieve, it is it is that visual that is as high as a mountain.
That's amazing. So you think she'd be really surprised that you kind of just how much you've achieved and how much you loved kind of that achievement and
Yeah, because I was a middle child and I wasn't the cleverest and I wasn't the funniest or the sweetest. And so, I kind of had to hustle for my role. And and it kind of emerged very slowly. I'd like to say I was a bit chrysalis like, sort of plain and brown for quite a long time.
that hustle again. I think is something that's very intrinsic in people who run businesses.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's a real
Yeah.
skill.
It's a determination. It's a sort of slight stubbornness, I think. I'm not sure it's as beautiful as we make out. It's sort of like I utterly believe in myself. Is that a good thing? I don't know. But you do back yourself ultimately. And you also find out, one of the things I feel very privileged in is that the people you work with along the way who've stood by your side when it's the toughest, you never forget. And they're so special, and to remember those people who came with you on that journey, stood alongside you, worked hard, doubled down at a time when it was all going wrong. There's nothing quite like it, and you're bonded for life.
Yeah. So, and you touched on like when things go wrong, like having your people around you, and that kind of determination and hustle and belief. What are there times in your life where you've had like real difficulty, where really had to dig deep?
Oh, yeah. I remember one year, Christmas Eve, I was wrapping presents on the bed. And I was talking to my colleague who was our in-house corporate lawyer, and we'd been trying to set up the contract in America with Kroger, which was our biggest deal at the time. And we'd been running a year-long pilot program. And I was talking earlier to my contact in America saying, have you signed the contract? Is the contract signed for next year? And he rang me up and he said, Edwina, I don't know how to tell you this, but everybody's gone home and it's not signed. And I was literally sitting there thinking, I've got 13 people in America whose salaries are not covered next year and there's no contract, and I've got to bring them back from America.
Oh, wow.
And I remember thinking, this is really, really bleak. And it was such a low point. And literally, we were talking to each other, trying to bolster each other and saying, it'll be okay, it'll be okay. And at a certain point, you just have to say, it's really bad, but I'm going to put it away until after Christmas and I can actually do something. And, in the end, it happened, but it was bleak.
Yeah. And I think when it's so important, isn't it, to be able to compartmentalize, for want of a better word, that
Yeah.
yes, it might be bleak, but actually there's other stuff going on as well.
Yes, and my children were still quite small, and so you have a duty of care for them, and you can't weep all over them on Christmas Eve, much as I felt like doing so.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think that's really interesting. I think that, and a really important element of that resilience of being able to deal with all those competing kind of
yeah.
challenges and opportunities. Which brings me to one of my favourite questions I ask on this podcast, which is, what is the best decision you've ever made?
Ooh, I think I think the best decision was that the business model that I created was that we would go into partnership with the retailers in every country where we worked. So we would not own all of the business or all of the revenue. So we would have a license with a retailer. The market that we created by repurposing the data for the retailer's suppliers, the Unilevers, the Coca-Colas, the Nestles, those types of companies, that we would share that business 50-50 with the retailer. So we went into partnership with multi-billion pound, dollar, euro businesses. And it meant that because retailers have this saying that they love, which is you've got to have skin in the game. That's what they love. And so instead of being a consultancy, we were in the family. And so they shared everything with us and they never let us fail in any country. So however difficult it was, for example, most people will say you will fail in America. We didn't fail because we partnered Kroger and Kroger helped us all the way. They even spoke to their bank and said, can you give these people credit to get started so that when their people come over, they can take out a rental agreement and have a car. They didn't let us fail at any stage.
And that's really interesting, isn't it? That you effectively gave away something in order to build those partnerships that actually brought you more back in the future. Was that,
Yes,
did it
and
feel quite brave at the time?
or foolish. One, yeah. I mean, you never know. You slightly hold your breath. What was so exciting was that for us, half of the revenue of these businesses was enormous.
Yeah.
But for the retailer, it was just tiny. It was almost insignificant, but they don't like feeling they've missed out on something. And so strategically, the fact that the supplier worked with them more closely was worth billions more than
Yeah.
the actual income that we made from running that business for them. So, it actually worked out proportionately. But yeah, it was a risk. And, the great thing was once we'd set it up, once we'd done it once, every retailer we went to see said, yeah, we want to do one of those. We just want the same. Tell us how to do it. And we would get out the template and say, okay, step 1 to step 100. And that's what happened.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So you touched a little bit on kind of a lot of people said don't go to the US because it's really hard to do. We all get lots of advice, good and bad.
Yes.
And I am going to tell a very little story before I ask you the next question because what listeners won't know is the only reason this podcast exists is because I interviewed you and you gave me a really good piece of advice. And I'll never forget it. And I noodled on it for maybe a year before I was like, right, I'm just going to go on with it. And that piece of advice was focus on the stuff you're really good at. And don't worry about the stuff you're not brilliant at because other people can do that. Because I'd noodled on, I want to do a podcast, but I don't know how to edit and I don't know how to do this. And I got so focused on the things I couldn't do, it kind of stopped me in my tracks. And then I this little piece of advice was sat in the back of my head that you gave me. And I was like, Edwina's right. Like, I can do this bit. I'll find someone else to do the other bits. So thank you for that. That was very good advice. But we always get given advice. And some of it's great advice, but we don't take it. And some of it's not so good. So my question is, what's a really good piece of advice you were given that you were just like, no, I'm going to completely ignore that?
Oh, I'm going to ignore it. Okay. Good piece of advice. Oh, I think I've ignored lots of things that I've looked back on and thought, damn, that was really good. And sometimes it's because you just can't see it. You've
Yeah.
not created that space, that kind of calmness where you're really listening and appraising. I think the thing I've learnt that a lot of people are very rarely wrong if they have the same opinion. And actually, it's like crowdsourcing anything. If you crowdsource wisdom, I don't think there's anything quite like it because, it's almost a data point. It's almost like the basis of statistics. It's that many people can't be wrong. But when you take an individual, I think the problem is that something that one person would find easy is not the same as something you would find easy. So I think the knack is saying, I feel I have the capability to enact that advice. And I think sometimes if you have a very different character or personality or set of values to someone else, you can't do it even if you know it's smart.
I think that is, I think that might even be better than the advice you gave me before, Edwina. Because I think that's so true, isn't it? It's just because it's great advice and in theory it works, it's got to work for you as an individual with your skills and temperament and knowledge and
Au-
ability.
Authenticity, knowing who you are, knowing when you can stretch and when you've reached the edges of
Yeah.
your capability, or authority even. It's really important to know who you are. I think you can grow, but you can't transform.
Yeah, I think that's so true. That's so true. So, as you know, the podcast is called A Beginner's Guide. I'm on a mission potentially to follow in your footsteps and write a book off the back of this. But to do that, what I need is really great advice. So, my final question that I ask everybody is if I made that book, rewrote that book, what is the one piece of advice you would put in A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown Up?
And it's such a great question. And, you can answer it in lots of different ways. But for me, the one that I think is counter popular,
Oh, we
counter
like one of those. Go for it.
is that I think as women, and I obviously include myself, is we sometimes worry about being angry. We worry about being seen to be angry. It's not feminine. It's not something that we're supposed to show. I think that can cause a lot of damage. I think it's entirely natural to feel angry. And I think it's a sense of rightness, it's a sense of justice sometimes, and it's such a healthy reaction to something that's just plain wrong or unfair. But I think on the whole, we tend to swallow it down and try and smile through that pain. And I honestly think it's very destructive. So it's not that you should ever throw the anger at someone, but I think you are allowed to be angry. And I think if you can explain to people, I am not angry at you, I am just really angry, give me a minute, an hour, or a day, however
A
much
weekend,
it
maybe,
is.
yeah.
Give me that because I'm processing it. I think it's just so much healthier because once it's outside of you, spoken, shown, demonstrated in some way, you dissipate the energy, you dissipate the negative impact it can have on you.
Yeah.
And and very importantly, you can turn it into energy that
Yes.
allows you then to do something at full tilt with all your belief and enthusiasm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're going to feel it, right? We feel the anger. So it's got to go somewhere.
Yeah. And not tears, because tears is when you're suppressing it and you're so frustrated, but they come out as tears. And that's when, we're told we're too emotional. It's like, no, we're too busy swallowing our anger and being polite.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Edwina, fantastic advice you've given us today. I'm loving the crowdsourcing wisdom. I might steal that one as a byline. Understanding that a good piece of advice might not be good for you because you're a different person. And I think using your anger to propel you forward I think is so powerful. And I think you're right. I think suppressing it just doesn't help anybody, does it? And it does make you frustrated. So your story's been really interesting. So thank you for sharing it with us from your start in Brazil, in Rio, to your journey through Dunnhumby and through to the female lead, and everything that you've learned. So thank you so much for coming on our little podcast today and sharing your insight and wisdom.
My pleasure. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you for listening to this episode of A Beginner's Guide to Being a Grown-Up. If you enjoyed it, please like, follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If there's someone who inspires you that you'd like me to interview, you can find me on LinkedIn, Instagram and TikTok. In the meantime, enjoy being a grown-up.